Welcome back, everyone, to today's Explainer. As your coach, I've sifted through today's top newspaper headlines and mapped them directly to your APSC GS papers 1 through 5. We're transforming the daily news into high-yield, structured insights so your prep is as efficient as possible. Let's jump right in. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with GS Paper 1 on foundations, move to governance in Paper 2, cover security and environment in Paper 3, touch upon ethics for Paper 4, and finally, dive deep into awesome custom for Paper 5.
Kicking things off with GS Paper 1 Foundations, focusing on culture, geography, and demographics.
Alright, starting with polity and culture, you absolutely need to jot this down. Recent scientific excavations at Mizoram's Dungtong village have blown the lid off a 1,600-year-old archaeological heritage. Carbon dating shows successive settlements from 410 AD all the way up to 1830 AD. This completely shatters that outdated notion that the Northeast lacks ancient historical documentation, right? It's literally a goldmine for understanding early Mizo ancestors and proves our regional cultural history is incredibly deep.
Shifting gears to geography and environment. The Union Agricultural Ministry isn't waiting around. They're proactively drafting contingency plans for the Kharif season because of the looming El Niño threat and predictions of a below-normal monsoon. Now, why does this matter for you? Because this is a textbook example of modern disaster preparedness in agriculture. If you get a question on climate resilience in your geography or economy papers, use this. Anticipating vulnerability instead of just reacting to crop failure, that's smart governance.
Moving to society, let's talk about the massive administrative pivot happening right now in Dubry. We're talking about the rollout of a fully digital Census 2027. Phase 1 alone is going to collect 33 distinct categories of household data via digital platforms. And they are completely phasing out the old paper and pen method for a self-enumeration online portal. This is a real game changer, guys. It makes demographic mapping faster, infinitely more accurate, and is an absolute must-know for data-driven social infrastructure planning.
Okay, moving right along to GS Paper 2, Governance. Let's look at federalism, justice, and disaster management.
Now, if you need a stellar case study in cooperative federalism, look no further than the ongoing dialogue between the chief ministers of Assam and Meghalaya. They are actively working to resolve their 12-point border dispute. They've already settled 6 areas, covering nearly 37 square kilometers back in the March 2022 agreement, and are now expediting the remaining complex differences. Notice this structured, phased approach. By tackling the easier parts first, they built the mutual trust required to handle the trickier stuff. It's just a perfect model of diplomatic conflict resolution.
On the e-governance front, Assam is taking huge strides in upgrading its judicial infrastructure. They've allotted 3.85 crore rupees to fund 5 new paperless courts, while concurrently setting up 7 exclusive NDPS courts to fast-track narcotics cases. It's a powerful dual strategy, you see, modernizing through digitization to clear out those massive backlogs, while simultaneously creating specialized courts to tackle the severe societal menace of drugs head-on.
And check out this brilliant move in disaster management. The Direct District Administration actually invoked Section 54 of the Disaster Management Act to establish a fact-check committee against fake news. By creatively applying the DMA to control the flow of misinformation during emergencies, they prevent panic and ensure rescue operations aren't derailed by rumors. Administrative foresight at its finest. Definitely quote this in your answers.
All right, let's shift to GS Paper 3, Security and Environment, focusing on border grids and community action.
Border management is evolving at lightning speed. Recently, the Union Home Minister reviewed vulnerabilities over at Surt Creek and Harami Nala, which are now 70% secured. But this local action, it actually feeds into a much larger national strategic doctrine.
In fact, you can quote this directly in your mains. The Home Minister announced a new 4-pronged concept and a paradigm of territorial security for the BSF. We're talking about a massive conceptual shift here. We aren't just guarding borders anymore. By integrating civil administration, local police, and advanced tech like drones and radars, we're building an impregnable, multi-layered grid. It's a total paradigm shift.
And underscoring the absolute necessity for robust internal security intelligence, just look at the ongoing probes in Tinsukia district. Fresh arrests, including a journalist, have unearthed deep cross-border terror-funding networks stretching all the way to Maharashtra. It really highlights how militancy isn't just some localized physical threat in the jungle anymore. It's a highly sophisticated financial web, and dismantling it requires serious financial intelligence and interstate police coordination.
Wrapping up Paper 3 with the environment syllabus. The Assam Pollution Control Board recently backed a collaborative art initiative in Silchar to tackle the menace of single-use plastics and urban waterlogging. This is such a great community-level case study. It proves that top-down government directives can only take us so far. If we really want to change societal habits, we have to engage the youth right at the grassroots level.
Now on to GS Paper 4, Ethics. We have a very relevant case study today on institutional integrity. The Supreme Court's recent, very severe reprimand of the NTA over the NEET UG paper leak is a textbook example of ethical failure in our institutions. The court explicitly stated the situation is traumatic for students and families, asserting that accountability must lie on individual shoulders. Pay close attention to that word, traumatic. When a national body loses its credibility through ad hoc mechanisms, the human cost on honest students is just devastating. But to flip the coin, if you need a positive case study on social compassion, look at the Rotary Club of Greenland Silchar. They just built a dedicated women's toilet at an ashram and silk quarry. It beautifully illustrates civil society stepping up to uphold the dignity, hygiene, and educational continuity of rural girl students. Both of these are absolute must-adds for your ethics notes.
Finally, we arrive at GS Paper 5, Assam Custom. We're diving into sociological shifts and demographic anxieties.
Okay, when you're analyzing the proposed Uniform Civil Code Bill 2026, neutrality is key. You've got to balance the arguments. On one side, you have the progressive angle, dismantling regressive personal laws, ensuring equal inheritance, and legitimizing children born of live-in relationships or surrogacy. But you must contrast this against the critical, sociological angle. Editorials are pointing out serious bureaucratic heavy-handedness. Mandating a 60-day registration window for marriages and live-in relationships could severely penalize rural and digitally isolated populations. It's a fascinating tension for your essays.
And here is a crucial phrase you should borrow from the editorials: the architecture of visibility. Critics argue that forcing the registration of intimate partnerships actually creates a mechanism for state surveillance and moral policing. It paradoxically sacrifices privacy and arguably true uniformity, especially since scheduled tribes are exempt. This is a brilliant nuance to include, asking if regulating intimacy crosses the line into moral policing just for political stability.
To really grasp these modern sociological anxieties, we have to zoom out and trace Assami's identity all the way back to the 1826 Yondabu Treaty, which kicked off British annexation and early colonial exploitation. By 1838, the Ahom monarch was deposed, sparking the formation of an Assami middle class that fought to restore the language. Understanding this history is absolutely crucial. It perfectly contextualizes today's deep-rooted push for demographic protection and the foundational spirit of the Assam Accord. And that historical context directly ties into the Ministry of External Affairs' recent announcement. They are ready to legally deport 2,680 Bangladeshi nationals once nationality verification is complete. The trick to scoring high in your exam is connecting those centuries-old anxieties about identity loss and resource exploitation with these contemporary, data-driven diplomatic actions. Which brings us to this huge development. The Union Home Ministry has just formed a high-level committee on demographic changes to scientifically study irregular population movements. This holds immense significance for Assam and the entire Ashtalakshmi region. We're finally seeing a pivot away from anecdotal fears toward a highly scientific, analytical approach to study abnormal settlement patterns and formulate solid, long-term policy.
So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought for your essay prep. As Assam navigates these totally uncharted legal and demographic waters with the UCC and population studies, how successfully will the state balance its deeply rooted historical identity with this massive push for modern administrative uniformity? It's the ultimate balancing act and a question you really need to ponder. Thanks for joining me on today's Explainer. Keep studying smart, use these frameworks for your notes, and I'll catch you in the next one.